Hello, everyone. This is Lorraine Borchers in Bend, Oregon with Lightbringers. Today we're going to talk with Cliff about his spiritual journey to divine love. It is Friday, May 20th in 2022. Hello, Cliff.
Hello, Lorraine. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So normally we like to start with a little prayer, and then we'll ask Cliff to introduce himself, and then he and I will have a conversation about divine love and what's happening in his life and what has happened. Cliff, would you like to say the prayer yourself?
Certainly.
Would you? Thank you.
Beautiful Heavenly Father, I am so thankful for this opportunity to share my life's journey and story that has led me to you. And I'm ever appreciative of our divine love community and all beautiful works that he brings with them as we all move forward together. We ask always for the opening of our souls to the great inflowing of your divine love and the resultant transformation therein. We thank you for all the beautiful things you have given to us in our lives, and we remain ever appreciative. Thank you for this time with one another. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful words, Cliff. Thank you so much. Well, this is your time to share with me and anyone who views this in the future. So would you introduce yourself, give a little bit of your background, and then tell us your story?
Of course. Thank you, Lorraine. So I was born in the early 80s in Northern California in a small town about an hour and a half north of San Francisco called Santa Rosa. It's much smaller then than it's gotten a little larger today, but that's where I was born and raised and grew up for the most part. We did spend, I want to say, 3 or 4 years in Boise, Idaho, when I was 8 years old to 11, 8 to 12, somewhere in there. And then we moved back actually to Santa Rosa. I would say that my childhood was a beautiful childhood. I had wonderful parents, a loving mother, a loving father. They worked very, very hard for my sister and I to have wonderful things in our childhood. Many things that they weren't able to have, we were fortunate enough to have. My mother was and is a devout Christian. I would say my religious upbringing was Christian. We spent a lot of Sundays in church and journeying to various churches and church events in my youth. I wouldn't say that my foundation in Christianity was established during that time, but I definitely grew up with religion and church and concepts of God in my childhood and in my youth. I started to wonder about spirituality in general, probably somewhere in high school. I would say anywhere between 10th and 11th grade, I started to wonder about religion and philosophy and concepts of the way we all choose to live our lives, and the world, how it all interfaces with who we are and how it influences us and impacts us, and started to pick and pull from various religions to kind of formulate my own, based on the truths that I perceived. I would, Buddhism and a lot of sects of Christianity and Catholicism and things to that nature, and I formulated my own religion, if you will, based on the.
So you were about 15, 16 then?
I would say I was 15 or 16 when I actually began to wonder about deeper meanings of life, concepts of religion. So that kind of continued for some time, and it kind of turned into a quest, to be honest with you. It was kind of something that was fixated in my mind a lot, um, seeking out truth and spiritual truth and spirituality, and just digging deeper into who I am as a person and who we are as a people. It's kind of always at the forefront of my mind. Um, my first introduction to the pageant messages, or true gospel revealed anew by Jesus,
Mhm.
would have been sometime in the late 90s. I don't know the exact date or time, but I went to high school with a friend, and his dad is actually a Divine Love follower, part of our circles. And I was actually hanging out at their house one afternoon, and their dog had actually died. I think it was that day or the day before. And so I was actually there when they buried the dog. And so because there was an empty dirt lot behind their house. So they buried the dog out there, and they had a little ceremony, and I was part of it. And my friend's dad offered up a prayer,
Mhm.
and there was something about it that resonated with me. Just it felt the prayer itself felt truthful. It felt like it was coming from a good place. It felt sincere, which was kind of things that were resonating with me then. So we struck up a conversation afterwards, and I began talking to him about, things that I had learned and sharing stories and stuff like that. And that's after that conversation is when he handed me, the copy. I think it was volume 2. It might have been volume 1. He handed me the first copy, I ever held in my hands.
Yeah.
I began to read the pageant messages and taking great interest in the pageant messages, the true gospel revealed anew. Um, I began to pray. I began to pray as the messages instructed Paget to pray the prayer, what many in our circles call prayer perfect.
Right. Huh.
So
How fortunate you were at such a young age to have someone bring that to your attention when you were searching and open to it.
I think that was one of my greatest privileges is being so young and being in the right place at the right time. But you're correct, that openness was a touchstone to all the events that followed. Without that openness, nothing would have ever occurred. And being so young, I hadn't necessarily formulated all of my fixed notions and concepts. I mean, we think of youth as being inadequate for spiritual things sometimes, but I had not formulated a bunch of ideas and things that would keep me from being open. And so it worked.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So I began to read the pageant messages and continued reading for some time. I would say, I don't know, 6 or 7 months. I read them, and I felt like I really had a deep understanding of spiritual truths and the concepts therein, and they resonated with me wonderfully. And though I had prayed and believed I had prayed earnestly and deeply, I hadn't really, it was all kind of mental, that
Yeah.
you know, that first initial wave of realizations and conceptualizations. They were all kind of mental. And
You
I
mean
had,
when you were first exposed to the pageant messages? Is that what you're referring to, or the earlier discovery?
forgive me, the pageant messages themselves.
Okay, okay.
And prior to
And
the pet,
and you were just a sec, you were having a normal teenage life, I assume, beside all this. You weren't just focused on pageant messages and your spiritual life, but you were living like a teenager would, going to school, sports, that kind of thing.
yeah. So I went to school, full time, definitely at the local high school. I didn't have a lot of extracurricular activities. I wasn't involved in sports, and in many ways, I was always kind of a loner by nature, but I had
Mhm.
friends, and we did
Yeah,
things together, but it was
right.
a tight knit.
Mhm.
I
Well,
worked,
yeah, so this wasn't your exclusive activity, is I guess is what I was wondering.
Well, no, it's not like I had
Yeah.
the luxury of sitting there for 8 hours a day and reading the
Right.
messages.
You were involved in life too. Okay, back to the Paget messages. And
So prior to the Paget messages, I had experienced some spirit to mortal communication. So I was not wholly devoid of some sense of spirituality. But it wasn't something that I would, that type of communication wasn't something that I was looking for or seeking out. It had just kind of happened. So I did have that in my favor, while reading the Paget messages, some concept of spiritual notions. But anyhow, so I read and read and read for 6 or 7 months and thought I had a firm understanding. And, you know, I was greatly mistaken. I found myself in a very poor spiritual condition. And I found myself in, what we've come to know as the hells. I found
wow.
myself in a valley of my own sins, my own greed, my own selfishness, at a certain point. And I think with truth comes the realization of where we are, and we can never really move forward until we realize where we are. And I found myself in such a terrible, terrible place that stepping aside from it, even just hearing birds chirping, was better than the place that I had found myself in. And it was this deeply depressing, deeply dark, deeply evil experience that I had, which led me to the realization that I hadn't gone far enough with my longings, and I hadn't gone far enough with my seeking. And though I thought I had prayed, I hadn't prayed earnestly enough. So it was from that very dark experience of awakening in one of the hells that I began to long deeper, and I began to look closer, and I began to break down my walls further. And I would say I continued to read the Paget messages, and I continued to pray the prayer just as Jesus had instructed Paget to do. I don't know, for another 7 or 8 months beyond that experience. And um, the first time I actually ever felt divine love flowing into my soul, I think I was about 19 years old. So I would say just after high school. I was still living at home with my parents, again, free from burdens, free from responsibilities, free from bills and mortgages and children and spouses and ex-spouses and all these things that come to us later in life. And it was late at night, and I was laying in bed, and I was repeating the prayer, just as Paget had been instructed to do. And after the third time, I was being prompted, pray again, pray again, pray again. And after the third time reciting the prayer, I felt God's Holy Spirit come down and touch me. And I felt like a tractor beam basically hit me in the center of the chest. And this fluttering began to occur. This wave, like people feel deeply loving moments. This wave, these butterflies began to envelop me in the center of the chest region. And I knew then by the abundant joy and the overwhelming gladness that was all over my countenance that I was in fact receiving.
Wow. So a physical and emotional response.
It was so sought after. It was something I sought for so deeply. But anyhow, so that continued. I continued to receive tangible portions of God's divine love and divinity um, for a while longer, 6, 7, 8 months. And it was becoming apparent to me that my progression was growing, my development was growing, the quality of love and understanding that I was receiving was becoming tangible to me. And I noticed a difference in myself and my actions, and people around me noticed difference in myself and my actions, and a lot of the things that I had created for myself that were not pure and of good intent or earnest began to dissipate, and a lot of relationships I had that were left in shambles began to be healed, and it was just an amazing time in my life, and it was beautiful. So had that all continued along those lines, it would have just been phenomenal.
Can you imagine? During this time, did you connect with the man who had introduced you to the pageant messages? And
Well, ironic, and his name's Eric. So, and ironically enough, yes, we were in contact, but I wouldn't say it was on a deeply spiritual level. We might have traded conversations or ideas or concepts about the pageant messages and divine love, but I don't believe necessarily I was under his tutelage.
right,
During
so
that
you were
time.
doing this on your own volition, and he wasn't a mentor to you.
Not wholly, but he definitely was there,
Hmm.
but not in the deeper sense you're referring to.
Yeah, not pushing or helping in that way, but
We
wow.
had an active relationship actually, because after high
Right.
school I would work with him part-time here and there,
Mhm.
doing jobs, but no, he never pushed. He was kind of off in his own world too, because
Yeah.
he was, I don't know, I'd say he's 25 years my elder, something like that. So we're at different places in life to begin with.
Sure. Mhm.
So let's see. So I continued to pray, and earnest prayer was the touchstone, definitely. Continued to pray, continued to receive, continued to see tangible transformation, continued to feel the inflowing into my soul. And that was beautiful.
Yeah.
And it got deeper from there. So after, during the course of all this, at some point, I was reading the New Testament Revelations, and I was reading number 6, which is the creation of man, and it's one that Jesus had brought to light. And I'm reading the creation of man. Again, I'm at my parents' home. It's late at night. Everyone's asleep. I'm sitting in the living room just reading, and I'm reading the creation of man, and I am understanding the words on this page more intently and more deeply than I could have possibly imagined. I'm reading the first and second paragraph, and it feels like everything that I am is just becoming intensified. All my knowledge of divine love and everything I had experienced up until that point is doubling and tripling, and I'm just being overcome with these great realizations at the concepts that I'm reading. And I was standing at the time, so I'm overcome, and I sit down, and I hear this beautiful and angelic voice, off to my upper right, and she says, "He is watching you." And I didn't think much of it, and then before I could realize anything, I just feel the master sitting next to me on my left hand side, and I don't know, I don't have a concept of what's happening because I'm being so overcome with development. And so I'm sitting there, and the master speaks to me, and he says, "Yes, Cliff, you could have done it." And it doesn't make sense to me until I kind of go through these pieces in my mind, and I think to myself, could I have done it? Could I have formed a rapport with Jesus? We're reading about Jesus in the pageant messages. We're reading about all these beautiful spiritual concepts and true
Mhm.
soulful Christianity ideals, and
And the
it just hadn't.
master you're referring to is Jesus. Yes?
The good master, Jesus, yes.
Yes. Okay. Just for clarification for others viewing this.
Of
Thank
course.
you.
So I go through the cycle, and I come to the realization that I have formed a rapport with Jesus, and um, I get these overwhelming sensations I'm looking for a pen all of a sudden, and there's no pen near me. So I get up and go down the hallway, and I get a pen, and I come back, and I got a piece of paper, and an automatic writing ensues. well,
Mm.
Cliff, you've been selected to do this great work on behalf of the kingdom, for you possess skills not all men have come to realize. And I'm just blown away. I'm just so overwhelmed at this point that the disbelief and, like Paget, he crumpled up the first message that he got from Jesus and threw it away. The disbelief and just the overwhelming fullness of the situation. The rapport got so unstable, and he closed with, "You must believe otherwise," and that was it. That was my first meeting with the master, with Jesus, and it was astonishing. And then I was so taken aback by it. I didn't know where to go or what to do or what to think.
Really? Yes. Wow.
So what do? I call up the gentleman who gave me a copy of the Blue Book. And I'm thinking, well, gosh, if maybe I should just get his take on things, because I'm probably going crazy over here. And so the next day, because I went to bed that night, reeling from the moment, and I woke up the next day and I called him, and he picked up briefly and he said, "Hey, I'm working. Listen, I can't talk right now." And he hung up the phone. And that was it. And about, I don't know, 5 minutes later, he calls back and he says, listen, I started feeling really funny on the roof, but I want to let you know, you met the master last night, and I met him a long time ago, and all that stuff. So he had basically confirmed the encounter. And I would say, for the next 9 months or so,
Mhm.
the master continued to appear in my life, and I continued to read the Paget messages, completing all 4 volumes, and the New Testament revelations, and anything else I could get my hands on and soak up. And uh, he walked with me a great deal, almost unceasingly for that period of time. There was no others. I mean, kind of became his special charge, and he was my guardian. There weren't any other
Mhm.
spirits that were really permitted close to me during that time. And he would come directly, because every night after work, I worked a retail job like a mile up the street. I didn't have a car. I didn't even have to worry of a car. I would walk or ride my bike to work. And when I walked, I would read the messages on the way there. And I would get home and I would pray. I would repeat the prayer that he gave to Paget to pray over and over and over again, until I could actively feel the love inflowing into my soul. And he would make an appearance that I could perceive. And it felt after a while as if the rapport was so strong that he would come into me and long to the Father through me. And so I would basically watch him pray to the Father for the reception of divine love into both of our souls, and for my progress and my journey to become more complete and more whole, if you
Yeah.
will, for my development to grow. So, and of course, all the great things that come with that, the soul development and the intuitive nature to things, and the forward looking projections and guidance in a person's life, and seeing how situations are going to unravel, before they unravel, and thinking thoughts and seeing them to their finalities before they happen. All those beautiful things occurred as well, but more so than anything, it was just the massive inflowings of divine love on scales that are just tangible, highly
Wow.
tangible. So that continued for, I'd say 9 months, and we had several beautiful experiences and several, life altering events. And
It's so
the
uplifting to hear you talk and hear the depth of your feeling during this time. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing time. And like I said, not having you know, there's so many worries and so much fear, I mean, that is possible
Mhm.
later in life, sometimes you feel young and invincible. And I was just so fortunate that it happened so young that I was only encumbered by a little bit of sin that had to be dealt with initially to kind of move me into a more receptive condition. I just had a little bit of greed, a little bit of selfishness. There wasn't 40 years of
Right.
constant worry and constant threat and constant, um,
You
you
hadn't
know,
accumulated all that encrustment.
I had my share, but
Yeah. But I mean,
it,
at that age, much less than many of us would have with more years.
you know,
Yeah.
so he continued to lead, and I followed. And it's the most amazing thing watching his prayers, his longings to the Father through me reach the Father and reach the fountainhead. And after a while, the way that he longed and the way that he sought response and communication with God in many ways became my own. And it's nothing more than a cognizant realization of the divine, the divine love, the essence and nature. We become like unto the Father. And that's just, we all share that with one another. And the longing, I think, is so important in actually receiving that tangible measure of God's love, that known reality that there is without a doubt a relationship forming, and a realization that the prayers are being answered, and that the good things, the glad tidings are coming. And the evidence of that is in everything that we become and do. And so it was watching that longing and seeing that type of response that um, helped me to grow and to have my own relationship with God, and um, receive those beautiful means of guidance that come to those seekers of the Father's essence and nature. Um, he took me as far as I could go. Um, the pinnacle of all that is, we, in the pageant messages, we hear about Jesus showing his glory or affirming his glory, and how bright and brilliant of a soul he actually is. And the culmination of all that was me bearing witness to one of those moments. I watched him come down from a much higher place and come into very close association with me, but not only me, the myriad of souls surrounding us. And he just erupted. It was just the most intense flowing of the Father's love that I've ever experienced. And it was so intense that I pleaded with him to stop. And he'd only erupted for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, something very brief. And I'm raising my hand in his direction, pleading with him to stop, because it is so overwhelming. It will expose, any insecurities or infirmities. You just can't get near it.
Right. More than you could bear at that time.
Probably still today too, to be honest with you.
You think?
So one can only hope, right?
Yeah.
So that was the culmination. And from there, I kind of, developed into a young man, and started my working career and my working life, and worked in several construction trades after that point, and worked as a carpenter the first 2 or 3 years, building custom homes in Sonoma County for general contractors. And after a while, I qualified to test for my own license, and I started my own service company and specialty contracting company. And that was in my early 20s. So did that for a long haul, worked way too much, did countless hours, and worked 80-hour weeks, so I didn't have to work a 40-hour week for somebody else. I always kind of wanted to go my own way and not be dependent upon other people and stuff like that. Got married along the way. By the time I was 30, we were running my wife and I were running a very successful contracting service company. We had employees. Was overseeing 10 or 12 service calls a day. It was a great time, materialistically in our lives. And the last decade or so, I've kind of been, stemming that down. It's a lot of stress. It's an immense amount of responsibility, having all that to move all those material objects and items and take on those types of responsibilities is a lot for anybody. And it leads to some things which aren't necessarily the best at times. So I'm trying to kind of alleviate those. And I still work running my own business as a contractor and specialty service provider. I work alone now for the most part. My wife still does the clerical side, the scheduling side, the accounting side,
Mhm.
and some of my ex-employees will help me from time to time when I have a heavier job with heavier lifting and stuff like that. And that's my story for the most part.
So how has divine love, it's a part of your normal routine. How do you find yourself relating to others, both within the divine love community, those who are aware of divine love, and as well as people in the world? Can you just share with us what's life like beyond work for you?
Well, so much of my life and my experience with people revolves around work because I thrust myself into it so deeply. And we have the special privilege of we go into people's homes for service work. So we get to see people typically one of their most friendly states and in one of their most comfortable places. And it tends to open doors, and um, we have the unique ability to be able to relate with them and meet them where they are, and share rapports that are beautiful in their homes. So in many ways, I feel like the greatest gifts that I have given as far as the ministry go are to the work that I have provided for the community. And it shows in the humble reputation that we've acquired over the
Mhm,
years,
mhm,
not only with customers, but with the entirety of the community at large. And all the lives that we've been able to impact, and that the souls who surround us have been able to impact. It's just been beautiful. And I would think that that would be one of my largest contributions to a form of divine love ministry. Beyond that, I haven't had a lot of one-on-one relationships with fellow members of the divine love community. I rode isolated in this journey for many, many years. Obviously, Eric and I kept in touch over the years, and we're still close. But he had moved to Southern California at one point, and he's back now close, and we still talk and converse and all that. But we don't get together and pray, once a week like we should. And beyond that, we're all kind of scattered amongst,
mhm.
the globe. And I had the privilege of being invited to a Divine Love retreat, which was held in Windsor, and that was hosted by Divine Truth, Church of Divine Truth. And I got to meet Michael and Carolyn and I want to Doug or Dave, and I got to meet Tim Foley and Holly and Joan. So I had and Joseph who had passed. I had the privilege of spending some time with them, and it was beautiful. And we're definitely all, sharing the same journey to some extent.
Yeah, yes. So you're finding that it's that, we're told that we're channels of God's love, that we can be instruments just by being ourselves in the world, that there's that soul to soul connection, that other people's souls recognize our souls and the brightness that divine love gives us. And I think that's what you're encountering in your work, is that other people are at a place where they're open to the friendliness and your help. And so I think it's on a soul level, as well as, now that with energy, they're finding that our hearts emit energy that interacts with other people's energy. It's the scientific community is starting to pick up on that as well. you know. So,
Absolutely. And I would definitely agree with you. It's a huge part of my nature and what I've done. And again, so youthful, I was so privileged to understand what it means to have the power of God's divine love flowing through an individual and being given to another soul, to the point where that soul, they may not recognize the Father's essence and nature, but they recognize love and they recognize goodness, and they'll be naturally attracted to those things because it's just the way it works. I would say, I don't know, a year and a half ago, whenever I started making my lowly appearances to the Divine Love circles, has
uh-huh.
definitely been the best interactions I have had with all of my beautiful brothers and sisters in the Divine Love community. Um, Al and Jean have afforded, along with many others, and yourself included, all of us to have this beautiful platform to connect with one another. And
Right.
I really had no clue. I mean, I was browsing the internet, and somehow I stumbled upon the Divine Love Sanctuary Facebook page, and I shot
Mhm.
out a friend request, and Beth Mazer responds, and somehow, the circles of light, I got invited to one of them, and it was all over with from
Yeah,
there.
those are our prayer circles that we have, and we're doing them online, which has been a wonderful use of technology that really exploded during the COVID isolation period. And so that's where I met you, was on the Gibson Circle online prayers.
Ah, yes, the Gibson Circle.
Yeah.
So those experiences have been life-changing for me, to be honest with you, because it's not a lot of people you can talk to about receiving messages from Jesus, or conversations or experiences with the master that can take hold of that and understand it in the way that our community does. It's the way we
Right,
perceive those things is definitely different, I would venture to say, than the greater Christian community at large.
right.
So just finding and seeing the faith that you and everyone else has been so wonderful for me, because I don't get I hadn't got a lot of that in my own personal life.
Yes, I know. My own experience was meeting Alan and Jean Fike when they were coming through Oregon on a trip.
Oh,
And I immediately, as they stepped out of their car in my driveway, they were going to stay with me for a few days on their way. And I had never met them before. But as soon as they drove in my driveway, I knew that they were okay. They were invited to stay at my house by a friend, and I had no idea who they were. And so immediately I knew they were okay. And then I go outside to meet them, and it was like meeting family.
mm,
It's just hard to describe. And so when you say that, sharing with others these experiences who understand it, it is so delightful. There's nothing like it. I'm so appreciative of and it's a worldwide community.
absolutely. I would agree with your sentiment completely. I don't think I've met anybody in person on the other end of the Zoom meetings and the
Mhm.
circle, yet they all feel like family. And
Isn't
the
that the
bond that
truth?
we
Yeah.
the bond we all share is just, no longer do I pray alone. Each time I pray, I mean, you all pray with me,
We're all
and I
connected.
with and I with you. It's just the way it works.
Hmm.
Uh, and I don't think I've met any of them. I cannot recall one of them I've met in person, face to face. But everybody feels like family, and obviously I'd open up my home to any one of them, and they're all welcome in ways that you wouldn't necessarily think a stranger or somebody you haven't met and shared experiences with in person are. So
Yeah, and what's delightful is that anyone who joins us as a new person is always so welcomed and just feels like it's right that they are there. And eventually that person begins to feel like you and I do, that
Mm.
this is the place for me. Yeah, I think it's it's at the soul level as well as our physical world. It's pretty special.
Yeah, it's incredibly special. It's a very fortunate time that we live in,
Mhm.
with all the technology and everything. And I was taken aback at the first circle I had attended, simply because of the great light that permeated the experience. I
Yeah,
just knew from the onset of that first circle that the intentions of everyone involved were so earnest and so pure, and that they were on the same journey that I am on and have been on for some time. And I think it's a real growth thing too for each one of us to be able to come together and share our experiences and have these types of experiences with one another. At least for me, it's been a very growing experience. I found it motivating to pray and motivating to see how other people's lives are being impacted with their prayerful lives. And, for the most part, I don't, say or do much or share much, simply because I don't want to interrupt, group cohesiveness.
yeah,
But it's wonderful to hear others share about their visions and their experiences, and the things that they take away from the experiences with the circles and the groups and the relationships with one another.
right.
And
Yeah, those things come during the quiet time because usually the prayer circles include a quiet period where we can get guidance and inspiration when we're open to it. And that's what you're talking about, people sharing.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was really fortunate to walk into the circles uh, fairly early in to Al's reception of our world in transition. I was definitely behind the curve. I wasn't there from the beginning,
Hmm.
uh, but it was, I don't know, 5 messages in, 6 messages in, and I didn't take them to heart at first, but was so cool is Gene recording them and putting them out on the WhatsApp. And um, it was just phenomenal when I finally realized how important the messages were, and the true source of the messages, and being able to hold that and have that as a part of my life was just one more motivating factor to further my efforts in prayer, to stop and to take time in the morning to pray, and to stop and take time in the evening to pray, and to stop what I'm doing and be reminded that a prayer circle is happening and you need to sit down and make it a priority, simply because that's the only way it happens. That's the only way the reception of the divine love and the divine nature comes into the human soul, is through prayer.
Yeah, through
And
asking for it.
when I had those wonderful inflowings and those wonderful beginnings and the experiences in the beginning, my entire life was a prayer. All I did every moment and hour was repeat the prayer that Jesus had given to Paget. And that's why it happened and flowed so readily, as everything that I was had become a prayer. So I think that's what's so nice about the circles, for me, is it's just a good time to stop and make prayer a priority. For
Hmm.
somebody like me, still a relatively young man running a business, working a lot, providing and doing moving an immense amount of material objects, it's easy to lose sight of spiritual things and
Right.
spirituality and love and spiritual concepts. And there was a long period of time in my life that I did lose sight of those things, never wholly losing sight. If it wasn't for the divine love, my life would have gone a completely different route. It was the divine love that was the one aspect of my life that allowed me to continue moving forward when everything else was falling apart, and when when the deeper, darker moments set in and take hold, based on the circumstances that we all encounter just living our lives. I can't imagine what somebody goes through who is not filled with the Father's essence, and who has not prayed for divine love, or who does not believe in a power greater than themselves. I commend them for being able to carry forward every day, because without the divine love in my soul as a last stand for hope that is never to be lost, I don't know how I would have gone through the last 20 years of my life and still been okay, or still found a reason to keep going.
Yeah. Yes. People who don't have it. Yeah. And the beautiful thing about divine love is once you have it, you can never lose it. It can only grow in your soul. Yeah. There's
So
so much, so much.
I truly count it a privilege to be a member of the divine love community, and to be a member of the participant in the circles of light and all the beautiful things that they bring, and to see the impacts and the influence of what God is doing in the lives of my brothers and sisters has been phenomenal. It's been, like I said, one of the greatest reminders to make time to develop these gifts inside of ourselves, and to ask for development, from God for these things, and to stop and make it a priority.
Because it brings such peace and joy and calmness to us. I've noticed that particularly, that my home is a haven for people. People come and feel the calmness and the peacefulness. And it seems that no matter what circumstances they are dealing with, that they come in and they can actually feel the presence of something. And it's described in many different ways, but I think that we, with divine love in our souls, really radiate that light of God's love. And what a blessing for us, and what a blessing we can be for others. Now I sound like I'm preaching, but it's just so a part of my life, as it sounds it is for you.
I don't know, preach on. You talk about all that peace in your house. I just want to know when I can come over,
Well, you do need to come to Oregon. It's not that far for you, Cliff. And you come to, where do you come when you visit the coast, right?
Yeah. No, we went to Waldport last time. My wife actually wants to go back in June, but it's such short turnaround time to deal with all that, because we're coming up on a 10-year wedding anniversary at
Good.
almost the end of June there. So she wants to go celebrate it. She loves the coast. We were both born and raised in Sonoma County, which is right on the coast. We had the water, 20 minutes.
Oh, beautiful.
Before we moved a couple counties north, we lived out it's called Guerneville. It's about 15 minutes, 20 minutes from the coast, So my wife loves going to the coast and Oregon, and
well, I think for that 10th anniversary, you should come to Oregon. And I'm moving from Bend over to Dallas, outside west of Salem. And it's like an hour from the coast. So you can meet one of the divine love people in person during June. Wouldn't that be fun?
Oh yeah, we'll drag my wife along. She'll get a great kick out of it.
Yeah.
What a way to celebrate the anniversary, huh?
Yes, that'd be good.
So
go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can.
I was just going to say that our time is about up. And so I'm wondering if you have any other final things you'd like to share with the people who are watching.
I'm ever appreciative that you've taken the time to listen, and same with you, Lorraine. I'm very appreciative and count it as a privilege to be here with you this afternoon.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing you all at the circles.
Perfect. And to our viewers, you are all welcome to join our circles, either through Lightbringers or through the Divine Love Sanctuary Foundation. We are always welcoming others and are delighted to share the information we have about Divine Love. So thank you, Cliff. You have a great day and God bless you.
Thank you.